Buenas and half a day. This public hearing is now called to order, and the time now is 8:07 a.m. in the morning. Apologize for us being a little bit late this morning. We're still waiting on other people to come and show up this morning. I thank you, Kathy, for being here on time. Scale, appreciate you. Today is January 14th, Wednesday, 2026. This hearing is conducted by myself, Senator Telo Taitague, Chairwoman of the Committee on Economic Investment, Military Build-Up, Regional Relations, Technology, Regulatory Affairs, Justice, Election, and Retirement. To comply to the open government law, notice of this hearing was published on KUAM and the Government of Guam notice portal on Wednesday, January 7, 2026, and the second notice on January 12, 2026. Notice of this hearing was also disseminated to all senators and media via email and is made available on the Guam Legislative website. I would like to recognize those who are here in person and those who are watching from home. Welcome to your Guam Legislature. I'd also like to welcome my colleagues who are here joining us today. To my far right is Senator Vince Borja, Senator Shelley Calvo, thank you for coming, and Senator Sean Gumatautau, Senator Chris Barnett, and the author of the legislation, Senator Agustin. Thank you, colleagues. Colleagues, copies of the legislation and document received ahead of this hearing can be accessed through the Google Drive link that was published on the public hearing notice for this hearing and also emailed to you in advance. For the listening public, you can access the Google Drive link on the public hearing notices published on the Government of Guam public notice portal at notices.guam.gov or on the Guam Legislature's website at guamlegislature.gov. If you need assistance, please feel free to call the legislature at 671-472-3465. Before I begin, I'd like to set some rules of engagement for this public hearing. When you speak, please make sure you speak directly into the microphone, and for the record, please state your name, position, and who you represent. I ask that those who are testifying today to please stay seated for any questions that my colleagues may have for you, and then you'll be excused. I respectfully ask that we conduct ourselves professionally and respect others' opinions. Those individuals who do not comply will be asked to remove themselves from this hearing. The following bill and agenda for discussion this morning is Bill number 4-38, COR, introduced by Senator Agustin, which is an act to add a new 3122 to Article 1, Chapter 3, Title 22 Guam Code Annotated, to enhancing the local minimum wage of Guam. This bill was introduced on January 13, 2025. Unfortunately, as we tried to schedule this hearing, one thing led to another. There were some emergencies, and we had to hold off on hearing the bill. We then went into budget hearings and postponed the bill as well. So we are here today now to hear this bill. So a physical note was also provided, and the physical note request was made on January 23rd, 2025, and a physical note was received on Thursday, February 6th, 2026. I believe it was January. Okay. One moment, let me just double check. The fiscal note was on February 6, 2025 or 26? Okay, so it is 2025. So hence we have not gotten an update for this fiscal note, even though it is a year out. Of course, we've reached out to BBMR if there was any changes, and I believe there were no changes at this point. Now, BBMR stated that the bill is intended to adjust Guam's minimum wage every year based on changes to the consumer price index and inflation. Now, legal counsel was also abreast of Bill 4-38 COR. and it was reviewed by legal counsel during its introduction, and at this time, we've heard no recommendations, changes, or amendments at this time. Invitations to this public hearing were sent to the following agencies: Bureau Budget, BBMR, Bureau of Statistics and Plans, BSP, Department of Administration, Department of Labor, the Guam Chamber of Commerce, Guam Women's Chamber of Commerce, Guam Contractors Association, Guam Housing Urban Renewal Authority, Guam Hotel and Restaurant Association, National Association of Social Workers, Guam Chapter, Anita Enriquez, President of the University of Guam, Rosanna Jones, Dean, School of Business and Public Administration of UOG, and Mary Claret Rumen, School of Business and Public Administration, Department of the University of Guam. And at this time, I would like to turn over the microphone to my colleague and the author of Bill 4-38, Senator San Agustin. You are now recognized on your bill.
Buenas to all of you here today and watching via our legislative channel. Also, thank you, Madam Chair, for scheduling this hearing on Bill 4. Bill 4 proposes an important adjustment to Guam's minimum wage by tying future increases to the Consumer Price Index. This approach represents a forward-thinking and equitable method to ensure that the wages of Guam's workers keep pace with the cost of living, providing greater economic stability for families and individuals across the island. The Consumer Price Index is a widely recognized measure of inflation that tracks changes in the prices paid by consumers for goods and services over time. By using the CPI as the basis for minimum wage adjustment, Bill 4-38 ensures that wage increases reflect real changes in the cost of living, helping workers maintain their purchasing power even as prices rise. The bill proposed that the CPI or successor index of the 12-month prior to December 31st will be utilized to determine the adjustment minimum wage calculated to the nearest 25 cents and will take effect on the preceding March 1st. If the rate of change in the averages of the Bureau of Statistics CPI is negative, there is no increase or decrease in the minimum wage. The minimum wage of Guam will either the local adjusted rate based on the calculation conducted by PSB or DOL. That includes the CPI and inflation of the federal minimum wage rate, whichever is greater. This policy is particularly critical in Guam, where many households rely on minimum wage jobs to support their families. Without regular and predictable adjustment, the real value of the minimum wage erodes, making it increasingly difficult for workers to afford necessities such as housing, food, healthcare, and education. Linking the minimum wage to the CPI creates a transparent and automatic mechanism for wage growth that reduces uncertainty and protects the well-being of Guam's workforce. Guam is not alone in considering the CPI-based minimum wage adjustment. Several U.S. states and jurisdictions have already adopted similar policies, recognizing the benefits of aligning a wage growth with inflation. Washington State minimum wage is adjusted annually based on changes in the CPI for urban wage earners and clerical workers. This system has helped Washington maintain one of the highest minimum wages in the country, ensuring workers are not left behind by rising costs. Oregon also adjusts its minimum wage each year based on the CPI, providing a fair and predictable increase for workers across the state. California has set minimum wage increase by statute. Several cities within California, such as San Francisco, use the CPI to determine annual increases, reflecting local cost of living changes. Alaska, minimum wage is adjusted annually for inflation using the CPI, ensuring that wage growth keeps pace with the cost of living. Colorado uses the CPI to adjust its minimum wage each year, helping to protect workers from inflation. Florida, voters approved a constitutional amendment requiring the state's minimum wage to be adjusted annually for inflation as measured by the CPI. Maine minimum wage is also indexed to the CPI, guaranteeing that workers receive regular increases that reflect economic realities. These examples demonstrate that CPI-based minimum wage adjustments are both practical and effective They provide a proven model for Guam to follow, ensuring that workers receive fair compensation that reflect the true cost of living in the community. In summary, Bill 4-38 offers a responsible and compassionate approach to minimum wage policy in Guam. By linking wage increases to the CPI, the legislature can help protect workers from the adverse effects of inflation, foster economic security, and promote fairness in the labor market. The experiences of the other U.S. states and jurisdictions show that CPI-based adjustments are a viable and beneficial strategy. I strongly urge my colleagues and all our people to support Bill 4-38 and to stand with Guam workers in securing a more just and prosperous future for all. I look forward to discussion on this bill and for any recommendation making this bill stronger to help and strengthen the working fabric of our island. Jesus Masi, Madam Chair, and for all your participation.
Sujus Masi, Senator San Agustin. And at this time, right now, we only have one person. As I mentioned earlier, we were kind of waiting for more people to show up. It is early. We usually have public hearings at 9 o'clock, but we thought might be more people coming, and we wanted to adjust the time accordingly. So at this time, I'd like to bring up to testify is Catherine Gale, who signed up. Okay, and then, yeah, you know how it works. Just press the button right there. And
Okay, how's that for you?
that sounds good.
Okay,
that
great.
sounds really good. Thank you. Okay, you may proceed.
Great. Thank you, Senator Taitague, and thank you all senators, Senator Borja, Senator Gumatata, Senator Calvo, Senator San Agustin, Senator Tlahi, and Senator Barnett. Good morning. I'm Catherine Gale. I work with the Employers Council. I'm the executive director. Just a little background, the Employers Council is a not-for-profit organization that's been on Guam since 1966. We help companies on island. Our motto is supporting great places to work. We help companies with all sorts of employment-related matters, helping them keep up with the trends and with the regulations. And I'm here to speak on behalf of our organization and our members. The Employers Council opposes Bill 438, which proposes to raise the minimum wage up to potentially $11.50 or more per hour and tie it to the CPI for an annual review and increase. I've presented, and I'm not sure if all of you have written testimony. I'm not sure in front of you if you have what I've prepared, and I'll go over and summarize that for you. I know it's a bit, but the Employers Council is very concerned about this proposed minimum wage increase, particularly at this point in time in our economy. Many of our employers are very challenged. Do you have one, sir, or no? Okay, please make sure so we can do it. Very concerned with the current challenging times for our employers. I will go over some of the key points, some of the key findings as we've looked into this as an organization. Indeed, inflation on Guam is very high. It's not, I mean, we've all seen it just, you know, anecdotally as we've observed from our own personal lives as we go out and shop. But looking at the numbers, Guam has outpaced the mainland by nearly double over the past 20 years for some reason. Why is it? Why has Guam's inflation gone crazy? So the U.S. has paced about 70% of the last 20 years. Guam's at over 125%. And it's not just as if it's a territorial thing. Even with other territories, we've outpaced other territories' inflation. So our concern here is the real problem is inflation that is hitting individuals, not necessarily the issue of wages. And we're calling on the legislature to look into this. What is going on with the key drivers of Guam's inflation? The issue of tying minimum wage to the CPI creates an inflationary feedback loop as written by Dr. Jones at University of Guam. She was quoted as saying, "Wages are a major component of consumer price index calculation. Adding that tie-in creates a compounding circular effect that creates higher wages, higher CPI." So it creates this never-ending cycle of increasing inflation, which is hitting us all. The currently proposed, if we were to employ this mechanism now, would increase the wage from what it is today, $9.25, to over $11.50. That's a 24% increase. There have been several studies about minimum wage and the effects on the economy. Those studies all looked at increases of about 10% or less. So wages or increases that start going up in these high double digits have, research has shown, negative overall effects on the economy. One of the things that we look at, and I'll talk about a little bit later, is the CATS index. It's the economic mechanism that they look at to see how economies' wages are faring, and they usually try to pin it at about 50 or less % of the median wage of the island. Right now, if you put that 1150, that would be hitting it up in the 60% range of our median, which again, research has shown starts having an overall negative effect, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. In addition, because recently, and I know you've quoted some of the different states that have been implementing these high minimum wage, research has finally caught up to the long-term effects of these, particularly looking specifically at what you were mentioning, the Seattle example. And just as recently as this past November 2025, The Economist did a whole section on how research is now revamping its view on the impact of these large minimum wage increases, because they're now seeing the long-term effects that they have on particularly the entry level, the low end wage brackets, that in fact, that it's resulted in a reduction in the hiring and the hours of these particular wage earners. Because the simple fact is the money has to come from somewhere. When you increase wages, employers have to find the money somewhere, and it results in, the three key results will be an increase in prices, a reduction in hours or / automation, which we are seeing much more now, and ultimately benefits take an impact. It has to come from somewhere. And I'll also note in some of my talking, we did a survey of our own members, and our own members responded. The number one thing they commented on is that business is worse this year, or 2025, than it was the prior year. Nobody, not one single member responded that business is better. And they predict for 2026, the majority say, I'm thinking they're hoping, it'll be about the same, but 20% say they expect it to be worse. So there is definitely a sense out there with our employers that it is very challenging times, and they're seeing it in things. So as mentioned, the real issue standing is what's going on with the inflation in Guam. And as I mentioned, Guam sits at about 125% versus the national average at about 70%. During that time period, the US wages have kept up with inflation. They've come over the past 20 years and increased about 80%. Guam employers worked very hard to keep up with that average as well. They've come in at about 65%. So if we had met the national average for inflation, our wages would be solid. But there's something going on in our economy that has it. So the implications are stark, an incredibly challenging economy, nearly double the inflation. So the problem is, what is driving that? And tying in the wage with that just creates this circular cycle that's not addressing what really is the issue, is the purchasing power of our people, our island. We acknowledge that we are starting to see a focus on that with the legislature. The business privilege tax, very helpful. Tax adds to cost. There's just no question about it. Tax adds to cost. And when taxes increase, prices increase, inflation goes up, people lose purchasing power. So that was a very, very positive development. The government also actively seeking out measures to help with infrastructure. We know a key driver, particularly on our island, of expenses and inflation is energy. How we can get reliable, cheaper energy to our people and to our employers so that we can bring costs down is absolutely critical. So that's come through. And the attention on the housing market, how can we make it more affordable for our people to rent and live in homes? These are all key factors when we're looking at what the key issue is, which is cost of living. As I mentioned, a lot of the recent research is starting to reevaluate the impact of the increases on minimum wage. As mentioned, The Economist reports that the consensus is unraveling as new research reveals problems that do not immediately appear in job numbers. The number one key is delayed employment effects. So looking at those increases in particularly Seattle has shown that hiring at the bottom end has dropped by about 10%. So you're really impacting those that, in effect, you're trying to help. It's showing that it's a reduction in hiring and a reduction in hours. On top of that, it's showing a degradation in the hiring, in the hours, in the sense that people are forced to take much more flexible kind of hours when minimum wage increases. So kind of just being available to work when needed, but not having that solid set hours and solid set paycheck. The other fact is a regressive price effect. So that is looking at prices, particularly for those that are low-income earners. And it's finding that increases in minimum wage impact products and services that minimum wage earners themselves use most. And a very interesting article just came out with the Independent. It too was just published in November of 2025, showing that most fast food products are now out of reach for the minimum wage earners that work in these fast food organizations. And that's because over the past 5 years, minimum wage for fast food organizations has increased upwards of 40% because of a number of large minimum wage increases across the US, even ones that particularly target fast food wage earners. So it's having this regressive effect that in the end impact those it's trying to actually help. The other key factor that particularly is of a concern for our employers here and our members is what we call the sectoral focus. Our majority of minimum wage earners, now note that our average low wage is actually above minimum wage. So the average worker, if you take the average wage, is above. But those industries that do hire minimum wage, bring them in initially, and then of course they'll work their way up, is the hospitality industry, our key engine. So the huge component of our wage is made up of food service industry and small service industry. And those are the ones that feed directly into our hospitality industry, our tourism. That industry right now is very tight. That is a very challenged industry. We've unfortunately lost members this year, not because they don't want to be members, but literally their businesses have shut down. We are losing members due to shutdown because of the challenging economic times. And a minimum wage increase is going to have a particularly significant impact on those industries. As mentioned, we did survey our members. Again, our members found that if there is a wage increase, 50% of the respondents said they will have to make adjustments. The first thing that they'll look at is increasing prices because they want to keep their workers and they want to keep their business whole. They've got to get the money from somewhere, so they'll be looking at increasing pricing. After that, they'll be looking at how to reduce hours, with a lot concentrating on automation, which again does not address what I know that the bill is trying to address, which is giving purchasing powers to those families that are struggling. So our primary concerns is the magnitude. If this was to go through, that's a 24% increase. That's an incredible jump. And as much of the research has shown, things upwards of that range have overall negative impacts, particularly in the long run. If this was to go through and it was a single timing, a single phase, again, a huge impact in a short amount of time is going to be very challenging for many employers to handle, particularly with our island economy and the sector that it's going to hit the most, which is going to be the hospitality sector. Tying it into the CPI is going to create that spiral with this constant feeding into the CPI, which is going to, again, erode the purchasing power, which is the overall objective, I believe, of this goal. And it's going to have a particular impact on your low-wage earners because, again, increases to the minimum wage often impacts the products and services that the low-wage earners themselves are trying to purchase. We request, or we hope, that the legislature will continue its progress on really looking at what are these drivers that are spinning our economies, our inflation so high, and what are measures that can be done to address those. That is what we're looking at, is the purchasing power. What can the legislature do through its actions to address that? To remove the CPI indexing, again, yes, it is very popular with, or a way that some states have looked at it. Speaking straight, it's something that polls well because it seems like, okay, CPI goes up, wage goes up, but the economists themselves and our own key economist on island, Dr. Jones, has shown that it does create this never-ending spiral of increasing the inflation. So it does not address what we're really looking at, which is purchasing power. And we hope that instead, the CATS index, which takes the median wage and looks at the minimum wage as a percentage of the median wage, is a more effective economic tool in seeing, is the minimum wage working well and keeping up with what it should be doing. So in conclusion, you can have a lot of things. All of us look at or are concerned about worker welfare, employers especially, because we need our employees to be healthy and happy and productive at work. Employees that are stressed by economic challenges are not happy and healthy and productive workers. So employers are just as concerned as everybody else, but we strongly feel that this particular approach misdiagnoses the problem. The problem is the purchasing power. Not only are employees being impacted by this out of control inflation, employers are. Employers are, instead of having that extra money to invest into their company, into their employees, they are having to pay out more just like everybody else. So addressing that, finding what those key factors are, really would be a fantastic benefit to everybody, both the employees and the employers, and we hope you can take time and consider and continue your work on addressing those inflation drivers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And we're going to go from Catherine number 1 to Catherine number 2. You know, we've got both Catherines today testifying. So you're now recognized, Catherine 2.
Good morning and Happy New Year. There's a couple of folks that are new since we were here on Monday. So Happy New Year to everybody. I'm Catherine Castro and I'm with the Guam Chamber of Commerce. And Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee, on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce, I write to submit testimony in opposition to Bill number 4-38. The Chamber shares the community's concerns about the high cost of living facing Guam's working families. However, tying future minimum wage increases to the Consumer Price Index risks reducing affordability rather than improving it, just as Ms. Kate said. The Chamber conducted a survey of its members over the holidays to assess business views on proposed legislation. 72% of the respondents reported that a minimum wage increase would have a negative impact on their business. 65% explicitly opposed tying the minimum wage to the CPI. 83% believe Guam businesses cannot currently absorb additional labor costs given the current economic conditions. 62% believe the current minimum wage of $9.25 per hour is fair, and 62% would respond to a $1 per hour increase by raising prices to consumers. Guam's economy is fundamentally different from those that are demand-driven. Price increases in our market do not stem from rapid wage growth or rising local demand, but from external and structural factors. This is things like import dependence, shipping and fuel costs, utility rates, regulatory burdens, and federal policy decisions, all largely beyond our local control. The Guam CPI reflects these cost pressures, not local economic expansion or productivity gains. Automatically linking the minimum wage to CPI would impose additional and uncertain costs on employers already facing elevated operating expenses. This creates a cost price cycle, and this too was mentioned by Kate. As labor costs rise, many small and family-owned businesses, particularly those with narrow profit margins, may be forced to raise prices, reduce employee hours, and limit hiring. These higher prices then feed back into the CPI, triggering further wage increases. Over time, this feedback loop risks accelerating inflation and eroding purchasing power, leaving workers and consumers worse off. In this way, the bill's automatic indexing mechanism could ultimately undermine its own goal of improving affordability. In California, the recent increase of the fast food minimum wage to $20 per hour raised average weekly pay for covered workers by roughly 10 to 11%, but employers passed about 2/3 of the higher labor costs through to consumers in the form of higher prices. Other analysis have documented restaurant closures, reduction of hiring, and tens of thousands fewer positions or hours than would otherwise have existed as businesses adjusted to sharply higher mandated wage floors. In Washington state, where the minimum wage is indexed annually to the CPI and is currently $16.66 statewide, studies of Seattle's earlier wage hikes found that low-wage workers saw higher hourly pay, but also reductions in hours worked, leaving many with only modest net gains in weekly earnings. These mixed outcomes underscore that large automatic increases in minimum wages can raise costs across an economy without delivering commensurate, lasting improvements in real purchasing power for the very workers they are intended to help. Guam should draw a careful lesson from these cases. States like Washington have combined high CPI index minimum wages with much larger, more diversified economies and deeper labor markets than Guam's, yet still face affordability challenges and uneven results for low-wage workers. Adopting a similar automatic indexing mechanism here in a small, import-dependent island economy with thin margins and limited competition risks magnifying costs and price pressures without guaranteeing that working families are meaningfully better off. To truly help working families, policy must target the root causes of Guam's high costs rather than imposing automatic cost escalators. More effective strategies include improving supply chain efficiencies, reducing fuel and utility costs through energy diversification and competition, streamlining permitting and compliance processes, providing targeted tax relief for low and moderate income households, supporting sustainable wage growth through productivity, workforce training, and business expansion. For these reasons, the Chamber respectfully urges the legislature to oppose Bill number 4-38 and instead work towards policies that lower costs, strengthen competitiveness, and promote shared prosperity for Guam's families and businesses. Stuart Mossing.
Thank you, Catherine. And at this time, I'd like to also recognize someone here testifying today, Mary Rhodes. from the Hotel Restaurant Association. When you're ready, please state your name for the record and your representation.
Hafade, and thank you for having us. My name is Mary Rhodes. I'm the president for the Guam Hotel and Restaurant Association, and I'm here together with the Guam Chamber of Commerce as well as the Employers Council to oppose Bill 4-38.
Mary, do you have a written testimony for you?
I will submit it. Sorry, I'm having a hard time downloading it.
Trying
for
to
you,
find it?
but
Okay.
I will submit it to you.
Yeah.
I know that there's a second public hearing on the 23rd as well.
Yes.
And so we will be getting more input from our members at that time to submit complete testimony at that time.
Okay.
But certainly we want to be here today to really share our concern regarding Bill 4-38 because especially at this time where we're at with the tourism industry, just knowing that we, as Catherine had alluded to already, that we've had so many business closures. We've dealt with multiple situations with regards to the pandemic, as well as the just Typhoon Maywar, and a lot of businesses are just recovering. Tourism alone, as you know, you've had many public hearings and oversight hearings here with the Guam Visitors Bureau, and tourism is still well below at 40% of where we were pre-pandemic. And so we're very much seeing a lot of challenges out there, and there are a lot of things that we have to focus on as an island, and there are many policies that we should be considering. I know yesterday we just had a bill with regards to what we should be doing more in the tourism industry to get things going, but really a wage increase at this time, especially in such a crucial moment where we've seen business closures and people are actually not hiring as much as what we've seen, and if you look at the wages over the years, both the average daily rate for our rooms, our occupancy, as well as for the room rate, as well as even the wages alone have increased due to businesses having to remain competitive. So I think that they've naturally, organically grown over the last couple of years that some might find surprising considering that our last wage increase that I know Senator San Agustin did have passed, a couple of years ago. We did see a $1 increase in 2 increments. But really, if you look at the minimum wage increase, and that'll be in my written testimony, is the actual where we are as a service sector, in the tourism sector, hospitality sector, it's actually well above the minimum wage. So the market itself is already there with regards, but the market determines the price. It should not be minimum wage. Minimum wage should not be for it's not the same as a living wage, and it's certainly not something that really our market can afford. We've seen challenges, as Catherine mentioned, again in California, but also in Hawaii, and a lot of other markets that I've mentioned in my testimony that there's just certain sectors that actually have had challenges even with hiring with regards to whenever they've seen wage increases like that, especially when minimum wage increases. It's very challenging, especially in the service industry, not just on Guam, but across the board. I think that when the numbers will show you that within the service sector already, most people, on top of the wages, they get tips, they get service charge, and so those things are already included in their wages, and so that's why a lot of people are actually receiving more income than what the report is giving. So anyone in the service sector, that is their average wage that they're receiving, which is about $10. And so that already, again, the market determines that wage. And right now, especially with the cost of utilities going up, and then with all of our cost of goods, we've already naturally seen an increase with regards to all of the market prices go up, and And I know that your goal here is with regards to inflation, and Chamber and the Employers Council, I've seen their testimony, and they already spoke to a lot of that. And that's also in our written testimony in similar language and similar concerns, that those things determine those prices. Because there are so many external prices that affect pricing, and Guam is certainly already at that point with the price index that you've already seen so many increases. And so for those businesses to continue to shoulder additional costs unnecessarily at this point, especially when our market is just really challenged in having to regrow and rebuild. And we know that even with our agencies like GVB trying their hardest to really get tourism rebounded, just our businesses, our employers are having such a difficult time in just covering operational costs and with the current wages that they currently have, with the current labor that they currently have. And it is very hard to compete, even with hiring practices. With the hiring that's taking place, a lot of people have cut back in operations, cut back in staffing, because tourism isn't there. Normally what you would see with the leisure market is that's when more hiring would actually take place. And we're already having such a large employer closing its doors with DFS, along with other businesses in the next couple of months. I think that the market is extremely soft, and it is going to be very, very difficult for these employers to continue to take on more, especially at a time where we have to build staffing at a level to meet the growth of tourism. So GVB is expecting us to be at 1 million tourists. Last year was 750. They're expecting to be at at 1 million tourists this year. You would expect naturally that we would start hiring again to meet those service needs. And so that would be extremely challenging for operations, especially during a mid-fiscal period of when this would happen. And so we implore the legislature to not pass Bill 4-38 and really work with our organizations to look at better ways of, looking at this in the future, and really continue to have more town hall forums or discussions of when is that right time, because right now, really the market is not, and we've worked with you when we've had the dollar increase over those years where they were done in incremental increments. And so that's something that I think GHRA, the Guam Chamber of Commerce, the Employers Council is something that we would always be open to discussing with you, along with the other organizations that work along with us. But it's something that I think that our market can't afford at this time, especially in the tourism and service sectors.
Thank you so much, Mary. And before we get started with questions, I have my staff providing you some testimony. We're going to get it so that you can be reading along. Department of Labor, as well as BSP, was not able to make it, but they submitted their testimony. And at this time, I'd like to ask one of my committee members in my committee to read the testimony of Department of Labor, and also another member to read BSP's testimony before we ask questions, so that you can see what their comments are and maybe be able to rebut or, have any questions. Their testimonies as well. So at this time, I'd like to recognize Senator Therese Terlahi to read the Department of Labor's testimony into the record.
Sizusmasi, Madam Chair. Dear Chairperson Taitague, this is dated January 13, 2026. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony on Bill 4-38, which would establish an annual minimum wage adjustment mechanism tied to the Guam Consumer Price Index, with any adjustments rounded to the nearest 0.25 cents. My comments drew upon the Guam Department of Labor's GDOL previous work, including the 2017 study commissioned to evaluate the effects of the last minimum wage increase, as well as a review of the current bill's language. The study analyzed the actual impacts of raising the minimum wage from $7.25 to $8.25 per hour, rather than relying on projections or assumptions. I recommend that the legislature review this study during its deliberations on this measure. A review of the language in the bill indicates it would take effect upon enactment. The bill directs GDOL or the BSP to provide a CPI-based minimum wage calculation on every December 31, using the Guam CPI for the 12 months prior to each December 1, rounded to the nearest 0.25, with the adjusted minimum wage intended to take effect on March 1. GDOL recommends the following technical clarifications to improve administrability and avoid ambiguity. 1, timing language. The bill currently states that the adjusted minimum wage would take effect on the preceding March 1st. This creates confusion because the calculation is required to be provided on December 31. We recommend amending Section 3122 to replace preceding March 1st with following March 1st in both instances where the phrase appears. Number 2, inflation references. The bill uses the phrase inclusive of the CPI and inflation, and also references the CPI average and rate of inflation. CPI is itself a measure of inflation. We recommend striking, quote, and inflation, unquote, and removing references to a separate, quote, rate of inflation, unquote, so the bill relies on one clear index. Number 3, agency assignment. Because BSP produces the Guam CPI, BSP should be assigned responsibility for CPI calculation and publication under this section. GDOL's role should remain the enforcement of the minimum wage rate established by law. GDOL's role in this framework is to enforce the minimum wage as set by policymakers, ensuring compliance once the wage level, whether adjusted by CPI or otherwise, established by law. The Guam Department of Labor supports policies that promote maintaining or increasing the real wages or purchasing power of Guam's workforce. Sinceramente, David Del Isola, Director, Guam Department of Labor.
Thank you, Senator Tulahi. Senator Barnett, could you please read into the record BSP's testimony?
Sidus, Madam, Sidus Masi, Madam Chair, Manana Sidus to the people of Guam. Thank you very much for watching, and Happy New Year. The testimony from Bureau of Statistics and Plans is dated January 13, 2026, addressed to the Honorable Telo T. Taitague, Chairwoman, Committee on Economic Investment, Military Buildup, Regional Relations, Regulatory Affairs, Technology, Justice, Elections, and Retirement. Hafaday Chairperson Taitague and members of the committee, the Bureau of Statistics and Plans, the BSP, does not have an official position on Bill 4-38, which seeks to establish a permanent adjustment mechanism for Guam's minimum wage tied to the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. Now, if passed, the Bureau of Stats and Plans stands ready to provide the necessary calculations and statistical data required to implement this act effectively. If you have any questions, please contact me or Deputy Director Matthew C. Santos, respectively, Saida Masi, Lola E. Leon Guerrero, Director. And I'm going to go ahead and read from the book of BBMR now, ma'am.
Thank you.
If you don't mind.
Yes,
Thank
please.
You. The testimony submitted by the Director, Lester Carlson, reads, Hafaday Senator Taitague, the Bureau presents this written testimony in response to the invitation to the public hearing on Bill number 4-38 COR introduced by Senator Joe S. San Agustin, an act to add a new subsection 3122 to Article 1, Chapter 3, Title 22, Guam Code Annotated, relative to enhancing the local minimum wage of Guam. The Bureau maintains its original position as outlined in the fiscal note for Bill number 4-38, which pertains solely to the fiscal implications on the government of Guam's workforce and revenues. The Bureau concurs with the Department of Labor's assessment that the fiscal impact on the government of Guam payroll expenditures is likely to be negligible, as there are currently no locally funded government of Guam employees earning below the proposed minimum wage increase due to the passage of the General Pay Plan adjustment in 2023. In effect, the overall financial impact of the wage increase on the government of Guam's revenues is also expected to be negligible. It is important to note that the fiscal comments collected from the Bureau of Stats and Plans and the Department of Labor, as included in the fiscal note and indicated in BBMR's request for fiscal comments and testimony, focus primarily on the revenue impacts to the government of Guam and do not reflect those of the private sector. Sinceramente, Lester Carlson, Jr.
Thank you so much, Senator Barnett. Just for the record, to let you know, there was BSP did submit testimony last year. in 2025, and then we did receive an updated version on January 5th, 2025. So at this time, I would like to turn over the microphone to the author of the legislation. Senator San Agustin, you are now recognized, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just got questions for well, one of them left, the other Kathy. The first Kathy left, but I know she should be back, Ms. Gail. But to ask the Chamber of Commerce and GHRA and Mary Rose, initially when we did the $1 increase, I heard a plea back then from everybody here that no, we shouldn't do it. But then at the same time, recently we passed a budget act that said we're going to reduce the GRT. And there's a big applause for that. And most of the testimony at that hearing was to support the employees and everybody else. Would there be any objection then? Because you're already objecting to the CPI. Would you object to a 50 cents increase for the next 2 years, every year? Or would you use the same reason that, no, we shouldn't do it at all? And we can start with the first Kathy.
Yeah, the first Catherine. Well, if you look at testimony already given by or not testimony, but comments given by Dr. Jones, she shows how the market mechanism is working right now. So, excuse me.
And before you continue, just to make sure you understand that when we did the bill that increased the 50 cents a year for 2 years, Dr. Jones was in support of it then. So, okay, you can continue on, then we'll...
Right.
How you got it on your testimony?
Right. So small incremental increases that allows the market to adjust naturally can be effective with the economy. I'm not an economist, but all the research shows this. So large mandated increases are the ones that particularly can have negative impacts, unintended negative impacts. But it's showing that it is working right now, the system of supply and demand within the wages. My concern for my members right now, which I receive in terms of their comments, is it's particularly challenging right now. What employees feel in terms of inflation, everyday people, employers feel as well as they try to run their businesses. And we've had, and I should have looked into this, but not just anecdotally, just through observation and through personal experience in our own membership, but it seems that we're having an unprecedented increase in the number of business closures, significant businesses too, businesses that have been operating for decades on this island that are finding that it is no longer possible for them to operate and do their daily business. So something is happening right now, and we need to look at it, and the legislature understand how the economy is operating. We look at certain things, and it seems like everything is fine if you look at taxes coming in, but a lot of that I think is being misrepresented by the impact that a particular industry, construction related to the military, but outside the fence, it's very challenging because our key industry, which we have sitting here, tourism, is feeling a hit, and it's starting to have repercussions as it's moving throughout the economy and through the rest of the community. So it is a trying time right now for the businesses, but in terms of wages and things, it's working in that. We see our wages have steadily increased, but it just can't keep pace with what's going on with this inflationary spiral. So what is causing that? And drivers like taxation, infrastructure, efficiency, all these things play into that spiral.
Going back to my question.
So
I understand you don't support the CPI,
yeah.
But would you support?
What do we support?
The 50 cents a year for the next 2 years? Basically, like the same bill I introduced. Mary Rose brought that up.
Back in before. I know, and we had met before with that,
yes.
that one.
Would you say that would be more reasonable than the CPI increase?
Well, without question, it would be more reasonable.
Okay.
But having said that, there should be a mechanism. We should have a mechanism that regularly provides solid data on what's going on with our salaries. Right now, you can pull up averages, but it's just an estimate. We haven't had solid data coming out. So that would be helpful, rather than a CPI, but a mechanism that pulls solid data on the economy, including wages and things, through surveys, would be very helpful for everybody.
All right, thank you.
Sir,
Yes, ma'am. Good
I
morning, Kathy.
absolutely agree with Kate, okay? But I want you to understand something also, right? This minimum wage situation, right, that we have, it really, really impacts the young people that are, they're just getting their feet wet into the work experience, right? And it's, as a business owner, I'm not a business owner, but I could only imagine a business owner, right? And you've got a 16-year-old, and you're going to pay them $16.66 an hour for learning. You have to teach them everything, right? So minimum wage is not a living wage. I think that has to be said a gazillion times. We need to understand that. And we also need to understand what's going on in our economy. As Kate mentioned, our businesses are closing. Why? Our government should be looking at what's going on here, and how can we help our businesses continue to thrive. Maybe it means putting some kind of decrease in certain types of taxes, a year, 2 years, just to get businesses thriving again, just to get people to invest, just to get people to be excited about being a business owner. I think those are the questions this panel needs to be asking. Not, are we going to increase the minimum wage? And we have just, all three of us, I wish there was more people here, but have all said the same thing. This is not going to help the people that we want to help. We need to understand that. And the people here on this panel need to, let's have a roundtable discussion, and let's talk about what are driving these costs up for these businesses, and how can we help them? Does it mean maybe establishing a student wage? I know that the legislature's never liked that in the past. And, Senator San Agustin was like, no, I don't want to talk about that. That's not fair. But really, when you talk about fairness, right? It just doesn't make sense to consider the minimum wage a living wage. So I think we just need to have a different type of discussion here. I think all of us have made it very, we've had our testimony, and it's clear. There's something going on here. Our businesses are not doing well. How can we help them? I think that's the question that we need to ask.
Okay, a short response to that, Kathy, is what is the chamber asking us to look at? Not just in general. When you start saying, you in the business community have taken a look at it, then communicate to us. What do you want us to help you with? Because in the past, for a fact, this body has introduced bills to provide funding during the COVID and everything else. And you can't keep asking for money, and I know where you're coming from, but I'm just saying, chambers should now come back to us and start saying, this is where we believe we're at. This is where we need help. Ms. Mary. For GRJ, I visit the hotel industries a lot, so go ahead.
Well, we're more than hotels. We actually have allied members, which are all of private sector, and then we have affiliate members, which are Gov Guam. So GHRA is actually more than just hotels and restaurants. We actually are similar to a chamber in the fact that we are more of a niche organization, one that supports tourism, but certainly with our more than 300 members, we make up all of private sector as well. But you're asking really the question, I think the question to the legislature is, as a percentage, how many people are on minimum wage? And when we had, and this is why I was suggesting a roundtable, because I think these discussions, before a bill is introduced, we need to know the data. And when you're really talking minimum wage, how much of a percentage of total employment are people at that minimum wage level, right? And so those are the numbers, and I'm sorry, I tried even using Sharice's Dropbox, the code, and I couldn't put up my Dropbox for some reason, but it won't allow me, and it's too low to pull up my presentation. So I have a PowerPoint presentation, actually. And so you really need to look at how many people are actually at minimum wage. Because what the challenge when you look at increasing minimum wage, which again is not a living wage, it's really meant for people who are just getting a first job, or people who are, again, having the basic wage, so because they're getting additional compensation, right? So like tips or service charge, that is in their total compensation. So minimum wage is used for multiple reasons. It's not to keep people at a level of a wage just because they first started a job or because that's where we keep people at, 15 years. There are other forms of compensation that takes place, and minimum wage is used as an entry-level wage, but again, a base wage for a lot of people who have other types of compensation where they get fringe benefits, they get their meals paid for, they get all their uniforms, they get, they also get, again, tips and service charge, some of them get commission, some of them get bonuses. And so when you increase minimum wage, you're increasing everybody who is receiving that, not necessarily if they're just starting out, as the younger generation would get a starting wage in that. You're really looking at increasing everybody's pay scales across the board and above, because you're also going to get into something what's called compression for wages. For somebody who might be at $9.75 or $10, and if I've been working in the industry for maybe 15 years and I'm at $12 because I get a 3% increase every year, but I'm at 12. And if you change this to 11, you're really going to hurt the employees who are in that compression area of like within $2 of it, because then the question is, does everybody move up? And so you really need an economic analysis of this. You really need data analysis to understand how many people are actually receiving these wages with bureaus, with labor, with the labor and statistics. We really need an analysis of that. And I believe we did that when we did the dollar increase. And so I would expect that we should do that as a group and really review that data, because how many people are you really talking about? And last I remember, it wasn't a large percentage are receiving minimum wage. And like I said already, the service sector, a lot of people are receiving above minimum wage already. And so that's really going to hurt us even more than just your intention of increasing minimum wage, because it's compression of wages will have to be considered to go up, or are you going to leave the people who have moved up naturally, organically through a couple years, where now they're getting the same as a person who's just starting? Those are all the questions the employers are going to be forced to face with, and the HR community. Because I'll tell you, whenever there is a wage increase, having worked not just at GHRA for the last 19, 20 years, but also at Take Care FHP for 12 years. Whenever you start to increase wages, there's a whole scale of others you have to consider with compression wages. Just for equity within employees, for looking at total compensation, and so you get naturally higher wages when you get skilled workers. And the minimum wage is meant to be for unskilled employees or people who are just starting out, or again, people who have other types of compensation. So no, I'm not in agreement in just throwing arbitrarily numbers out there because we have to remind ourselves the economy that we have today. We are not the construction industry. We are not the federal government that already has these increases with prevailing wage increase, right? Where they have to provide this on the base. You have to think about all the businesses who are competing for employees outside the base as well. There's already a lot of natural competition out there where the market demands the rate. And again, those markets determine the wage. The increase in earnings will have a ripple effect in having to also pay more taxes. So it's not just the wage itself. You're going to also naturally increase employment tax. All right, so it's not just a wage. Anytime you increase pricing, you naturally increase taxes. You're also going to increase the price of goods and services because those costs have to be transferred into something else in order for businesses to be at net revenue or net for the year. And so they're going to increase prices in goods and services. They're going to receive less. Those employees that you increase these benefits, they're going to receive less in federal benefits in social welfare. The line in which already, just so you know, a lot of employees don't work full time. There are a lot of employees who, ever since COVID, have gone into the public welfare system, where if they make under, I think what is it at today? I think it's 28,000. 28,000 a year is about $10. There you still qualify for public welfare. So you have to look at the poverty line threshold of when they get social welfare benefits. So I think really as a body, the legislature should be looking at all of these numbers that impact, that wage will impact. It's the poverty line level, it's the number of taxes that you're going to also have transferred to the businesses once you increase wages. It's the compression wage, how many people are actually in the minimum wage, and then therefore will the others be affected. Also, the federal law passed the overtime exemption, and then also tips where they can declare up to $25,000 without declaring it in taxes. There's other things happening in this market that benefits people that were passed by this administration or by the federal government. And so employers are having to deal with a lot of nuances in a very depressed market. Maybe because you guys have seen increases in your budgets and in the economy itself due to the buildup we're all experiencing. This buildup is temporary. It's temporary. And we have to really be focusing much more on the market that has been here for the last almost 60 years, and that is the tourism sector. If you're seeing the tourism sector struggle, everybody else feels that because the insurance industry, the banking, the retail services, that's why you don't see a lot of people just eating out or going to the malls as much as before. That consumer spending has gone down since pandemic and PUA money has gone away. You will see a downward spiral whenever tourism sector, you cannot ignore the tourism sector. Tourism sector used to make up 60% of our GDP. I believe it's only at 35% now. That's a huge impact to our market in general. A difference of 25% in the GDP where it shifted way over to the construction industry, but yet you're wanting this private sector, which is majority service sector, to pay a higher wage when they're struggling. You really have to look at the macroeconomics of what's happening on the island, not the micro. Because the macro of majority of the people and the majority of the employers and majority of the industries outside of construction are not doing well. The retail, the service sector, the professional services, they're all feeling the effects of tourism being down. And so, no, I don't agree with any arbitrary number, and I don't agree with any increments as an increase, while tourism is still at, especially at 40%. We need to be at 100%. We need to be 100% of goal. GVB has not met its goal of even getting to their budget arrivals in the last 2 years. And I know that there's been, we supported the $11 million marketing incentive plan to get them to 1 million tourists. But remind you, they did not meet the 700, they were very short. It was only, I think, 3 or 4% off of last year's goal. But they've been struggling. We've been struggling. So no, this is not a time to be considering any type of increase that is not absolutely necessary to increase services to our community. We have to look at other ways and other means, because we have to look at other opportunities, because it is not a time to increase costs for our employers, especially in the service and private sector.
Okay, Mary, thank you. Doesn't answer my question, but thank you. Okay, we go on, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Of course, I'll circle back at the end to allow you to close. Next on the list who came in by senators is Senator Sean Gumatauta. You are recognized, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the panel for being with us this morning. And what a way to start the day, talking about probably one of the more important things that, quite frankly, the lifeblood of our entire economy depends on. And thank you again for your insight. I had a couple of questions. I don't know if you can answer them, but I do want to ask them. And then I have at least one other comment near the end. But based on the June 2025, the current employment report from Department of Labor, in their stats, it showed a decrease of 470 jobs over the year and a decline of 360 jobs in the latest quarter. This is June 2025. What information, maybe you guys might be able to help us, because I know that DOL's not here, but what information is known if any of those 470 lost positions may have included health insurance benefits, and if those employees might have had some second source of income or employment? Have you guys been hearing anything about that at all? I just wanted to ask. Go ahead, Mary.
So this is also my PowerPoint. Those decrease in jobs, some of them are in the service sector. I know it's on their website. I looked it up. And you're seeing it in other sectors, in the private sector. But, something that has been happening because of lower revenues and people having to cover costs is when you're starting to see business closures or people not making as much revenue as they've seen, even personally, like even as much as the construction industry has been growing. So even my husband, for example, we've seen such a difference in just even the last 2 years because there's increased competition, right? There's increased competition. And when you see that, a lot of people, especially when people are closing businesses, those who are left behind still offering services, they can't hire as many people because the revenue still isn't there. So they're having to, how many business owners do you know are having to cover the jobs of people they used to have employees for? They're having to man those positions or those duties because they can't hire people yet until they're making a profit, right? And so it makes sense to stay lean and to cut back operations. How many restaurants do you know and other businesses still are operating weekends only? They're not operating 7 days a week. A lot of people still have limited hours. In retail, in service, in restaurant, they're not operating full hours. So what that's really telling you is there's reduction in jobs because people can't afford to hire at this time. They're allowing the people to stay lean in their operations, so it's fewer jobs, but at the same time, there's something called the substitution effect. The substitution effect that I mentioned is reducing use of low-wage workers because they have to hold on to the people that have remained loyal to them. And so especially when there's competition with like the federal jobs or jobs on the base, those who have remained loyal to the pandemic, through Typhoon Mawar, through increases in wages just naturally and people having to remain more competitive, I'd rather pay my employees, $1 extra or $2 extra just to remain competitive and hold on to really good employees because I don't want them going off to a competitor or even to a whole new industry. Something that happened after Typhoon Mawar and even the pandemic is a lot of employees changed trades And GCC really did a great job offering additional trades, like especially in allied health and things that people weren't exposed to in construction jobs. And both Trades Academy and GCC did that. So a lot of people have switched out industries, and it's very hard to recruit those people back, whether they moved off island or they changed out a trade or they changed out industry altogether. So there has been a brain drain and just cannibalization within different industries of each other. And those employees aren't coming back because they've already learned a new trade since those jobs weren't available to them. So it's naturally shrunk. And so I think that businesses have learned to operate with less in order to cover costs or to make a little bit of profit. And they're remaining lean, which is smart, especially when our industry is still at 40%. They're going to remain lean until they start to see that number. You know, in the insurance industry, you're losing money if you don't make at least 80% on to cover all your medical costs. So if you're not making at least 80% to where you were prior years, then you're really losing money. Because operational costs, M&A, I mean, those are at least 28% on average, right? If you're operating a business. So you know all your administration costs and marketing costs are going to be at least 20 to 28%. So you have to make at least 80% to make any kind of net revenue. And so people are reducing those jobs and staying lean, cutting hours of operation, which means reducing jobs, and then also looking at technology to replace workers. And so once they do that, they've shifted. They've shifted their mindset, they shifted their priorities, they shifted their money to cover expenses and not necessarily people. And so that's what will continue to happen, and we won't look at hiring for a while. And so when we used to, you know, and that unemployment report, we always talk about this whenever we talk about minimum wage. That unemployment report is not necessarily, if you look at the factor, and I always have these nice conversations with Gary, I love Gary Hiles, but the unemployment report does not include the unemployed, people on social welfare. The unemployment report only looks at people who are actively looking for a job. So remember, we had headlines before. The unemployment report does not include the 50,000 people who don't want a job. I don't know what that number is today, but look it up in the media. That's about the number of the number of people. Our population is what, 155,000 people? If 50,000 people do not want a job, and you know, to be fair, that's including your retirees, right? Those are including your people who can't work for transportation reasons, and that's your youth. That 50,000 number is a real number, and our unemployment number does not recognize them.
Okay, but let me just shift a bit. So, Catherine, did you have something you want to add on that about this idea of the second source of income? I saw you kind of like nod your head a bit, or even maybe welcome Telo to this public hearing. Could you offer any insight?
You know, I don't, you know, I am not a business owner, right? But I've been with the chamber for 30 years, and just hearing from the businesses, right? And really it's basically what Mary said, is that people are just trying to be lean. And actually, there are so much more businesses that are contemplating closing because they've been in business for 60 years, 50 years, and because of the economic conditions that we're in right now, they're just saying, you know what? I'm just gonna close shop. I'm just gonna retire, and I'm just gonna close shop. And this is really heartbreaking, because these are mainstay businesses. These are businesses that we know. These are businesses that we rely on, that we trust, right? And so, I mean, again, this goes back, and I'm not really answering Senator Gumatautau's question, but really this goes back to what, we need to really analyze What is going on in our community?
I'll come back to that just in a second because I think I'm on that train of thought. Let me go to my second question because it might help me pull it all the way through. You know, regarding the number of individuals, as Mary alluded to just a few minutes ago, 52,500 people who did not want a job.
Right.
During DOL's survey period for the unemployment report. Very much a different report, same period, June 2025. What portion are you aware of on the panel? Are you aware of represents college students, individuals with disabilities, and what information, if any, is available confirming whether any portion of that number or otherwise employable individuals eventually have joined the workforce since that June 2025 report? Or what are you hearing on the streets, I should say, perhaps?
So here's something to also consider, because of those 52,000 people that are not employed, I don't know what that number is, Senator, but there is a significant number of people that would like to work and they cannot get transportation. So I have, this is probably not advisable, but I have picked up people when I'm driving to work and dropped them at their workplaces because mass transit didn't show up. Or they have to be at mass transit site at a certain time, but they don't have to be to work for hours later. It's just, and these are, these people want a job. These people they need the income, right? But we as a community, we should have reliable transportation, right? And you talk to small businesses, and they'll be, yep, that's my employee. My employee comes to work. I mean, they're at the job site at 6 o'clock, but they don't have to be to work until 8 because that's what time, their mass transit drops them off, or they have to beg for rides, or whatever it is, right? So that's, I would love to know what that number is, because I'm pretty sure that's pretty significant, and that would greatly impact how businesses would be able to thrive if they have people that are willing to come to work.
No,
and get there.
I agree. I just want to circle back all the way back to the Employers Council. And Madam Chair, the testimony from Roseanne Jones that was sent to us, very significant, and it does talk about process. And I just wanted to read, Madam Chair, for the record, in her conclusion, this is from Dr. Roseanne Jones, our Dean and Professor of Economics at the University of Guam. She said this, quote, "Automatic wage indexation can work. 19 states prove it, but they succeeded through careful process design, adequate timelines, and economic monitoring in an economic environment that is different from Guam. If Guam adopts this approach, implementation should reflect our realities: benefit cliff challenges, island business economics, concentrated economic structure, and the need for ongoing oversight. This is not implement and ignore policy. It requires active monitoring as our economy moves through cycles." Close quote. I actually, when I read this and was listening to earlier to the Employers Council's testimony, Madam Chair, it is clear to us that when we look at how we develop policy, especially like this, that it would be very reasonable to look at how we can implement. It just can't be, okay, let's raise it, use indexes. And there's, obviously there's some meaningful, thoughtful amendments. But really for us, as we look at it, and the rest of the country is going to do the same thing. But I would strongly, heed some of the input from folks like Dr. Roseanne Jones. And if you haven't read her minimum wage study and the addendum in 2017, maybe we need a new wage study for 2026 as just a kind of a departure point if we're going to go down a road to look at this, because it's just like the things that we're seeing all across the government. Do we need to do an E911 study? Is it going to, does it mean $1? Is it for a surcharge? Is it going to be nothing? Same thing should be just like this. when we think about wage, and I would strongly recommend, Madam Chair, that as we move forward, just to kind of help to listen to some of the experts in our community, they spend a lot of time and effort to complement and give us the input that we all need to be able to make a good decision relative to this issue specifically. And thank you, Madam Chair, for the time. I just wanted to close with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Gumatauto. And just for the listening audience, as well as my colleagues, on June 23rd, 2026, from 4 to 6 p.m., we will be having another public hearing on Bill 4-38 for those who were not able to attend today. And we received a notice from Dr. Jones that she was intended to come, but something came up, and she did send us a message that she will be here on the 23rd. So I hope my colleagues can also be here and listen to what she has to offer. Before I get to you, January, yeah, did I say, what did I say? June? I said June. Okay, sorry, it's January 23rd. 2026. Before I get started, and Mary, is it okay if you can hold that thought, because Tay, you just walked in. Did you want to testify, or do you have any comments that you want to make before I continue for questioning?
Yes, sure. Let me just introduce myself. My name is Telo. I am the chairman of the Guam Chamber of Commerce. I know I had other commitments, which kind of delayed my arrival here, but I believe Catherine has already provided a statement, official statement from the chamber in opposition of this bill. But just on the side note, just as a business person, me individually, I wanted to provide my comments and my thoughts on any type of increase on the minimum wage. Now, I hope everyone just understands that a minimum wage is normally is implemented due to increase in costs, right? So when cost goes up, cost of living goes up, everyone assumes that anyone making in the minimum wage range, they're going to have a difficulty in terms of affording basic items, and that's why there's going to be an increase on the minimum wage. But counter to that, if you really think about it, if you really increase the minimum wage, what happens is cost of goods, cost of many services also increase. As a business owner, if there's a minimum wage increase, what I would do is, if there are times when I need to not only cut in terms of hours, but there's also times when I'm gonna add in the additional cost of doing business into the price. And when I do that, seems to increase the consumer price index overall. So the comment I get from a lot of my employees, and this is me personally, is that a lot of my employees do not get paid in the minimum wage range. But these folks are always hesitant about any type of minimum wage increase because they do see that the cost of goods are going up every time there is a minimum wage increase. So you're talking about folks that are making in the $15 per hour range, $20 per hour range. They don't get an automatic increase when the minimum wage increases. These are folks that are, very productive individuals, and they've been in the industry long enough to know what happens when minimum wage goes up. They also feel that it's unfair that the consumer prices are going up when it's not, they're not getting the same increase in pay while the minimum wage and the consumer prices also go up at the same time. So I think at the end of the day, we need to really look at the bigger picture of things. There are very productive middle-class income individuals that are going to get squeezed out by this. So it's not only individuals that are making minimum wage, but also it's individuals that are being paid $15 per hour, $20 per hour. And they are also being squeezed out. Their income is deteriorating. Their purchasing power is definitely deteriorating at the same time. So it's something to consider, something to take a look at. Another aspect about this bill is if there is a CPI study that will be done, and then minimum wage will be adjusted based on the CPI study. Just keep in mind, a CPI study also takes into consideration cost of goods. right? So that goes into a spiral effect. So every time there's an increase, that increase in minimum wage, all of that gets factored into the consumer pricing. And if the consumer pricing goes up at that point, now you're going to have to start questioning whether there needs to be another increase in minimum wage. So there are factors that need to be considered. So please keep that in mind before taking the CPI into consideration. Thank you.
You're very welcome. In short, Mary, you wanted to respond to...
Just to Senator Gumatao, yes.
Okay, please.
I do have the analysis on that last number with the 50,000. That was actually with the Guam census as well. And so I could get you that breakdown of the 52, is it 52,250? Is that what you're saying? So yeah, there is an analysis. There is a breakdown of that. Those, again, under 16, and then it's usually 16 to 23, and then those who are in retirement, who are retirees. So that is available, and I think it's government data. And so I can work with you on getting that breakdown. But with regards to what you stated about economic impact study, we did discuss that during the 17 as with Dr. Jones as well as in 2019. And there was a public law, it's Public Law 32-178, that stipulated that an independent economic study must be conducted before any consideration can be made for another wage increase. So I implored this legislature to look at Public Law 32-178 because that was passed into law that we cannot do another wage increase without doing an independent economic study. So again, Public Law 32-178. And I looked back at our 2017 and 19 studies and 2019 testimony, and we did a joint survey with the Guam Chamber of Commerce on what could happen. I know that was something Senator San Agustin asked, and I do have the results of that. And it's something we actually offered as a solution, which you were looking for, is considering a youth wage, similar to the Fair Labor Standards Act. There is such a thing as a youth wage if you're looking to introduce other means of a type of wage where the employer, at that time in 2019, it was $7.25 an hour, and that employees, so there's standards at the Fair Labor FLSA that could, if you want to introduce a youth wage, I think that's something we would all be in agreement with. And I have the language on that from my 2019 testimony as well.
Thank you, Mary. Before I turn it over to Senator Barnett, I'd like to also recognize my colleague and a member of the committee, Senator Sabina Perez. Thank you for being here. Senator Barnett, you are now recognized.
Sidos Masi, Madam Chair, and again, Manana Sidos to the people of Guam. Thank you for watching on our YouTube stream, and if it's cutting off, like I'm hearing it is this morning, you can always jump over to GTA or Docomo. And Sidos Masi to the panel for all of your very insightful testimony. I guess I'm just trying to figure out here if those in attendance who have provided testimony, it's obvious you oppose this minimum wage increase and the methodology that it's tied to, but do we take that to mean that you oppose any minimum wage increase? I know, Mary, you had said that you oppose any minimum wage increase until tourism's at 100%. So we're just trying to, I'm just trying to gauge here what type of increase, if any, would be palatable to the various organizations that represent the employers and the businesses on Guam.
The Employers Council opposes a minimum wage increase at this time. However, having worked with Senator San Agustin with the last one as well, any minimum wage increase, were it to be implemented, should be a minimal and it should be an incremental that allows it to kind of naturally be absorbed and worked. But particularly at this point in time, we find that a minimum wage increase would be very challenging for our employers. So,
thank you. Tay or Catherine, good morning.
Yes, we would also not be in favor of a minimum wage increase at this time.
So again, I I've already said all that, but I think that it really, we're beholden to do that economic analysis and also a wage study. So not just an economic analysis, but an actual official wage study. We've been talking about doing a wage study at the Employers Council for the last 2 years, and not necessarily because of in expecting a wage increase. You know, it's been discussed at the federal level as well as with our current administration, our current governor. So we were looking at doing a wage study, which has been conducted by the Employers Council in the past, and GHRA has been a partner in that. And so I think it'll be great if we could work with the legislature in doing this independent economic study as well as a wage study before any increases should be considered.
It would be very beneficial to have a study, and we've had it in the past, and we have, you know, legal. It would benefit all of us to have this steady data. It doesn't need to be annual. Every 5 years would be great, coming in to work from, to understand really what the impact overall is and what our current status is.
Thank you. I don't want to say be careful what you wish for, but I'm sure any study is going to show, and I'm assuming it's going to show that a minimum wage increase that might be significantly higher than what's being proffered in the bill. And I only say this because when we addressed the general pay plan in the legislature, which was a 22% across the board increase for working people in the general pay plan structure, the recommendation that was made at the time when they factored in the cost of living and compared the wages on Guam to the wages in the States, I mean, the number that was floated in the committee reports was somewhere upwards of a 40% increase. So when we talk about these external factors that influence the CPI and the cost of living on Guam, I think we as lawmakers can't really allow the workers or the businesses really to continue to be held hostage by these external factors because, I mean, the biggest one, obviously, it's the Jones Act, right? And that's something that has to be addressed at the congressional level. And so while we have here in front of us a panel that's representing the employers and the big bosses and the businesses, big and small, what I think is missing from this conversation and what I think the bill attempts, who I think the bill attempts to speak for are the actual working people who are making minimum wage. And I'll just tell you a little story, because I think it's a little unfair to say that the minimum wage earners and the working people of Guam are facing the same circumstances as the employers, because obviously the employers and the businesses are better equipped to deal with the rising costs of living because, you know, their bottom line is significantly higher than someone who makes $9.25 an hour. Like my friend Cinta, who works at Wendy's. And we've seen these fast food increases on Guam already. I mean, you know, it used to be you go to the drive-through and you could feed, you know, all your kids for $20, but now, you know, fast food, any trip through the drive-through is like $40 and up. So Cinta makes minimum wage, and then after she gets off her job flipping burgers, she goes to clean offices. And after she's done cleaning offices, she goes to clean people's houses on the weekends. This is exactly the kind of life my mom lived as a single mother trying to raise kids. And she wasn't looking for a handout. And so when Cinta comes home at 11 p.m. or midnight, she's got no time to spend with her kids. She's got no time to catch up with the family. And this is 6-7 days a week. So while we talk about the businesses and the challenges of paying our workers more to address the significantly high cost of living on Guam, and we talk about, you know, doing things to benefit the businesses, we just did some big things to benefit the businesses. We rolled back the business privilege tax 0.5% this fiscal year to the tune of $40 million, and then 0.5% next fiscal year for a grand total of $80 million. And I think what bothers me, because I've watched many of these hearings coming from the media, I've watched a lot of hearings on wage increases, and it's always said that we have to let the market dictate when the environment is good for a wage increase, but I've never heard a single person, whether they represent the Employers Council, GHRA, or any employer or business type entity come before the senators and say, yes, it's a great time. Let's do this. And so you kind of telegraphed your testimony, which I definitely appreciate because it's insightful, specifically to the methodology for these increases, right? But I think to the minimum wage people who can't show up to a legislative hearing at 8 in the morning are going to say if they can't pay the bills, I mean, the obvious answer is to pay them more, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that minimum wage workers are as unskilled as many say. I think they're trapped in a cycle. For example, take the case of Cinta, right, who's a mother of 3 kids. Because she has to work 3 jobs to barely make ends meet. We're not talking about she has a profit, but because she has to work those jobs, she can't afford to better herself, to go to the University of Guam, to get out of this minimum wage cycle that we talk about. And so just going back to, as a body, what we've done to assist the businesses, again, with the 1% reduction in the BPT to the tune of an $80 million reduction in government revenues, with all the testimony that came here to the People's House, I don't believe there was a single piece of testimony that said that this $80 million would go towards wage increases for the workers. And I think, Tay, you had said as much, that you guys are stressed with just the cost of doing business, that the thought of paying the workers more didn't even enter the equation. So I think the question is not, do we need to pay our workers more? I think the question is, how do we do it, and whether or not this CPI, tying it to the CPI, is the right way to move forward. But I just wanted to put those thoughts on the record again, because we've heard from the business and the employer side of things, and I just wanted to speak for my constituents, many of whom are struggling to make ends meet with not just one minimum wage job, but several of them. And so I hope as we move forward, we kind of hold that in our mindset. So, Sijos Masi, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to speak this morning, and thank you again to the panel for your testimony.
Yeah, you're very welcome, Senator Barnett. And
Madam Chair.
Before I recognize you, again, on January 23rd, hopefully from 4 to 6, we will have another public hearing. So those who couldn't make it in the morning, hopefully we can have more of those individuals coming to testify. I don't know if there was a question, for you at all at this time, so I'm going to keep moving, and then if you'd like to move it into somebody else's comment, if you make a comment. So at this time, I'd like to recognize Senator Shelley Calvo. You are now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your insightful testimonies. Under the right circumstances and landscape, I would probably say yes to this proposal in a heartbeat. However, I approach the proposal with open but cautious mind. I think it is worthy to consider the proposal of the panel. I know there's another hearing later, but just to take note that an increase may happen, but conservatively. See, the thing is, $2.25 increase. I wear multiple hats. I'm gonna try to put this into context as a very conservative, tiny business owner. And the reason why I want to recalibrate everything, and I have not really made my decisions towards this matter yet, is because for a tiny business owner like myself, $2.25 is quite steep. If you're talking about the whole year, it will cost me, for one employee of mine, cost me $4,680. Now, if I consider that I have 20 employees, that will cost me $93,600 just for this proposal. So that means it will add to my expense by almost $100,000. Now, that's for a small business like myself. Think about the many businesses that probably has 50, 100 employees. That will cost them almost $500,000. additional to their expense. Now, I just do my math based on what I know as a business owner. And at this current temperature, I'm a little worried because I have honestly, firsthand information of the many businesses that are going to close down starting end of this month and the following months. You're talking about in the next quarter, the potential of losing business or losing employment by the hundreds. So that is quite alarming for our community. And I don't want to set alarm, but we are really in a dire situation. Now, I will support a very, conservative approach on increase. But I think that a study, proper data, proper recommendations, more economists to bring into the table will be imperative in this season. 2026 is quite a scary year for our island, and I encourage everybody to proceed in caution. I do not really have questions right now. There's a lot in my head as a business owner, but as a policymaker, of course, and a business owner, of course, I would like to take care of my employees. But we got to help each other at this point in time. And on that note, I'd like to thank Madam Chair for the opportunity to speak, and I am willing and open to work with the good author of this bill and the panel and everyone else who would come up with regards to this, because as a policymaker, there is a balance between we want to take good care of our people, we want to take good care of our employees, but we will not be having these conversations if there are no businesses that are going to operate out there. Right? So we got to approach it with the proper balance. Anyway, on that note, thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Senator Calvo. Senator Chalahi, you are recognized.
Sijusmasi, Madam Chair. Thank you all for being here and for your testimony. I'm very happy to see the detail of it. I guess my questions would be, Mary, if you could just explain to us, what do you expect to see in this the wage study versus the economic impact study? And I looked at the public law, by the way, and I don't see a mandate in there for one, but it just mandated that the wages would be increased at that time. But maybe there's another law, so I'll check that also.
On the bottom. It's the very last line of that public law. It's one of the last lines that required it was one of the stipulations we asked for, that, just so you know, that minimum wage increase probably lasted over a year, and it was very grueling process, and even just to get to the incremental one. And so it was one of the things we asked for because, as Senator Barnett mentioned, be careful what you ask for, because those economists, right, just with data or any kind of research, it's interpretation. So you can interpret almost any piece of it with context or even without context or taken out. You can interpret data a lot of different ways. And so what we asked for was that we threw in at least the independent economic study to be done the next time, so it wasn't a contentious situation between private sector and the legislature when we did another increase the next time around, because we want cooperation and we want everybody to come in with accurate data, with information that will help guide us in making better decisions and making better policies. Now, with regards to the wage study, I can tell you in the several wage studies that were done with the Employers Council over the years, it aligned very similar to what the labor reports show. And I have to say, I do love Gary Hiles. He does a great job in providing the data, although it's a little late on the months that are reported. But the data is pretty good of what we get. I wish it could be a lot more detailed, but and a lot more timely, more consistent in how it's being reported, because there is a time delay. But I have to say the wage and hour study that has been conducted in the past, has aligned very similar to what is being reported. But the challenge is it's always like, so much time apart from when BSP reports, and then our study, it usually is within that current year. There isn't a study that's really doing a prospective view, right, of what's current today and if you raised it to this much. So that's why Guam Chamber of Commerce and GHRA conducted that study in 2019. It was a survey to see what would happen, and the results of that would be like, how much of it would you have to deal with compression wage, and just what would the results be of you as a business owner? How much does this affect your employees as a percentage of those who are in the wage scale, in being lower minimum wage up through to the compression? And then also, what would you do with, would you lay off? Would you have reduction in force? Would you have increase in cost of goods? So we actually have that survey from 2019. But the wage survey itself, I have to say, has aligned very similar to Department of Labor. But, Department of Labor, their sample study that they report out, it's not a large sample. And so we would have to work with the government to make sure that the study that is conducted is going to be as comprehensive and as inclusive as possible.
All right. And but let's say what you have testified is correct, and that's what the study is going to show. That's what was testified probably in the past, I think, same thing, that those would be the negative impacts. And then Department of Labor, according to their testimony, did this study in 2017 on the actual effects, not on predicted effects, but the actual effects. And I tried to read it very quickly, and generally they say no effects on hiring, no effects on economy, no negative effects either. And kind of minimal effects on households, but and no effects at that time on those receiving federal assistance. Of course, this one might be different because of the levels. We need to see that. I would like to see that as well.
Yeah.
But kind of the theories were the same, right? And what about you're asking for a wage study and an environmental impact study?
No, economic impact.
Economic impact study. And you don't think that any of the data or the studies that have already been done can be applied in this case?
Yeah, I think you can certainly look back and take some of the percentages of how much it was applied, but I think those are really different times. 2017 and 19, we were at 1.6 million tourists. And so businesses were, in better states. And then also, we were able to get it from $1 increase to 50 cents. So it gave us at least information, qualified information, qualified information to make better decisions and have better discussions. And that's why, it was held off. I don't know if you knew, but because they had to do that study, it was actually held off until they could get more data. And so I thought that was a really good way to cooperate with each other and to get more time for the businesses to adjust to a possible increase. And even if it's incremental, where that $1 is broken out to 50 cents and 50 cents, similar to how we had to deal with the federal increase, and that was the sample that was given at the time when it was Senator San Agustin and Senator San Nicolas at the time. The federal wage increase, we dealt with those increases over 3 years, right? In prior to the 16 and 17. And so businesses are at least given that ample notice and time to adjust, but then we had data. And I think that's what we're really asking is if anything is going to be considered going forward, it should be a standard here at the legislature. It should be a standard not just for the legislature, but for Guam Department of Labor, that any increases should come with an analysis of that data. Is
there any study on the effects of the BPT rollback on hiring or raises given in these businesses? Where that
We have not
rollback was
conducted
effective?
anything with the rollback.
Yeah, no, we've never seen that either, and
I think it's if I may,
yes,
Madam.
is there a study, Mr.?
No, there is no study. I think it's a little too soon to really see a study being conducted, but I mean, this is just me hearing from our members. As a matter of fact, businesses are making every effort to keep consumer prices down as much as possible.
Yeah, I'm just asking if there's a study.
Yeah,
because we're talking about the studies right now, because at the time when we were doing another BPT adjustment, I think Revenue Tax was required to keep some statistics to show us whether what businesses had done with those
so if there's
rollbacks.
stats you're talking about, then I have some stats, and this is just coming directly from the members. As a matter of fact, when the 0.5...
The surveys?
It wasn't a survey. It was a case study of an actual petroleum company here. As soon as the BPT was rolled back, they reduced their gas prices. That's the first thing they did. Okay, so there are evidences that businesses are making efforts to control consumer prices as much as possible.
Where can I find that?
I could get you a testimony from most...
No, I mean, you said it's a study or something that was done.
It's not a study. These are actual cases of members discussing with us, and they're informing us these are actions they're taking to control consumer prices.
All right. Okay, and I'm just checking, is there any study done across the businesses how many of them provide health insurance to their employees or not? You have that data? Okay, and then
So the Employers Council has conducted. We are working this year to conduct another survey specifically of that because our data is old. It goes back to prior to 2017. So we are working on that.
all right, and I note in your testimony, Ms. Gale, that you did acknowledge you call it positive legislative action on inflation, and you talk about the BPT rollback, the 40 million this year, 80 million next year, the power infrastructure modernization, where they say they're going to have better technology to anticipate changes in the weather, and you talk about housing market reform. That's a resolution. It hasn't actually been addressed yet, that there's debate on right now. But there's so much more that the government is doing to help the employees of private sector, including the Medicaid, including the MIP when they can't qualify for Medicaid, those for medical insurance for disaster and other things that exceed caps as well. Also, tax credits on certain industries, and they haven't required mandatory health insurance by these companies, so that's why I am curious about those statistics as well. And of course, we're here trying to find a balance, and I understand what these businesses are facing, and that we do, I totally agree with you, have to continue efforts to address rising costs on Guam, and how we are all going to address that as a community. But this has, as Dr. Jones testified in her letter, it wasn't read out loud, but she talks about how this has effectively been done in other states, and how they've, she calls them safeguards from other states where they put caps on these increases. And the sponsor of the bill has actually proposed, what if it was a different than Taitague CIP, with the businesses agree to a minimum wage increase of 50 cents. And so I think there's still room for discussion on those things, possibilities of this relief, but I did ask the public health, what is the minimum of wage that you can receive and still be receiving the Medicaid. And I think it's 9 some. I just lost my feet too, but 978 maybe. So yeah, I think that should factor into our decision. We can't raise those. And but there is something I'd also like to get clarified by the committee, and that is, so the bill says, well, they suggest it would be a 4% increase, but of course, BSP, they tie it from 2021 to 2024, and they say it would go from 925 to 1129. And in your testimony, say that it would be a 24% increase to 1150. And then Department of Labor said it was going to be, what did they say?
Yeah, so the 1150
They put another
aligns-
number which is much lower
Yeah.
here. It says,
Yeah, the 1150
only go up
aligns
to
with
$10. Yeah.
with the mechanism that Senator San Agustin, it would round it up based on that's what it was saying. That's why I said 1150.
All right, and then, yeah, so I just guess I would like to see that clarified, and several of these agencies have requested clarification in the language so that there is no ambiguity as to how that's actually going to be clarified, if that is the amount that's used. And so the employees, what do you think that they should be told? That wait for the market to raise their wages, wait for, I don't know what, that we need to grant them larger assistance on this side, and that would require taxes. I guess that's just some of the considerations, I think. Always in all of these wage increases over the years, even with the studies and the economic impacts, they've actually they've been raised, and they've been raised in the other states as well, and because of what the employees are facing. So I'm going to continue to listen to the testimony. I'm glad the committee chair is having another hearing, so we'll continue to listen. But I think some of these things also need to be clarified. So thank you, Madam Chair.
You're very welcome, Senator Chalahi. I'm going to reserve my comments until the second public hearing to listen to more people's testimony, to look at some of the comments that were made today, to review that, look at the studies. I did look for the bill that Public Law 32-178, and I didn't find where there had to be a study required. I did pull that up. And so maybe, Mary, you might, you can forward that to my office, and then I'll be glad to send it to my colleagues as well. So I greatly appreciate you being here, and I'll just now turn it over for any last questions or comments that the author of this legislation, I'm sorry, my bad, I'm like in a fog today. Apologize for that. My good colleague, Senator Paris, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the panel that has come here today. So we receive other testimonies, and one of them was an individual saying that even with $11 an hour or $11.50 minimum wage, although it's needed, it's not a livable wage. And so, we hear about, rent skyrocketing. We hear about, the lack of transportation, like you said, Catherine, to get to the jobs. And so, it's a larger problem. Of course, increasing a wage would be a relief, would be a lifeline to those in our community. And I know there was something mentioned earlier about we need to know, I guess, the impacts, the true impacts too, right? Because we don't want to have this system where you increase rates, cost of goods go up, and it's a never-ending, it's never-ending cycle either. We definitely need to get a handle on the macroeconomics, like what is happening with our economy, how do we address it, including the cost of living. And so really, yeah, there's so many issues that the root of the problem is the inflation, right? A lot of that is the root of the problem, I think, is inflation. Inflation here in Guam, which is twice the national average, as you mentioned. And it has a lot to do with like the Jones Act, I believe, the shipping, sourcing our materials, which are costing us so much money. But I think that we really need Department of Labor, more of their guidance as far as how many minimum wage workers are out there and which industries are being impacted, and because it's not one monolithic. To me, businesses are not monolithic. They come in different sizes and different needs. Some can really pay their workers and not worry about the minimum wage. Some are truly going to be impacted by the minimum wage. And so I think we need more of more information, but I do feel that definitely our people need relief at the same time. And kudos to those employers that really are investing in their employees and providing, more of that livable wage, right? Which is very hard these days. And how do we get to that point? I know there was a mention about, training up the workers. And I know there was at one point when the federal government increased the service wages to $15 an hour, I was hearing feedback from the community that they're finding it hard to compete with the federal government on those wages. And so yes, there are market situations that can exceed the minimum wage requirements. And I just would like to know, I guess, what is the current situation, because maybe businesses do have to respond where they're providing wages above the minimum wage. And I think I need to know the extent to what that is happening so we can maybe identify the support that's needed, more directly support. Hearing my colleague talk about his mom and how she had to work 3 jobs. I mean, that, and, sacrificing their kid, their family, that is hard. They're leaving their kids to, possibly, they're not able to look after their family while they work to make a living to meet the needs, the daily needs of their household. So I think that just more of a comment, and I do agree that we have, we did provide, a reduction in BPT, which means the government has the onus to subsidize a lot of the needs. So this is something that is a balancing act. And I know there were some comments that were made by Catherine regarding what needs to be done. I know those are long-term things that are definitely, I think we can all agree, in regards to how do we strengthen our economy, make it more resilient. And most importantly, the cost of inflation here really needs to be addressed. But yeah, how do we make this work here, considering that we do have our economy is not diversified. So just some thoughts that I have. And if you do have information, maybe this, as far as data is concerned, about the number of those working at the minimum wage, and where those impacts are going to be, and maybe how we can assist. The other thing too is, like, I know there is a delayed reduction in BPT. I mean, that's something that, do we reconsider that if we're going to have to subsidize assistance, right? So that's something that would need to be also considered. And I do welcome the idea of a roundtable to talk about, economics, how do we move forward as a community? So, Mr. Masi, thank you, Madam Chair.
You're very welcome. And again, I apologize, Senator Paris. I didn't mean to forget you, especially you. You're my vice chair. So that being said, I also invite you to also come back again on January 23rd. There might be more questions or comments that you'd like to provide, as well as what you provided today, as well as bringing on new data and information that was requested earlier during the conversation. Statistics, reports, et cetera, down the line will be very helpful. And at this time, my office will continue to receive written testimony on today's hearing, which may be emailed to my office at 238 Archbishop Flores Suite 407, the DNA building in Hagåtña. You may also send your written testimony to my office via email at senatortelot@gmail.com. I did ask the author of the legislation if he'd like to close, and I think he's going to reserve his comments until the end of the second public hearing on January 23rd from 4 to 6 p.m. And I encourage those who are listening, if you have a stake at this, to please come forward and testify. This is your house, and it's important that the senators hear your concerns and your testimony. So that being said, we will recess today's public hearing until January 23rd, 2026 at 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Thank you for your participation, and create a great day. Thank you. Time now is 10:18 a.m. Thank you.